The moment Maribelle Storm pushed open the swinging doors of Red Hollow Saloon, the murmur of conversation dropped to a startled hush. Her boots echoed on the worn wooden floorboards, carrying the weight of years spent in quiet fury. The air was thick with tobacco smoke, the scent of stale whiskey, and something darker fear. Curiosity, the sense that tonight everything would change. She paused for a heartbeat, letting her amber eyes sweep across the room. Patrons froze mid-drink, mid-laugh, mid-hand of poker, their expressions flicking from confusion to unease. At the bar, a shadowed figure shifted slightly, almost casually, but Maribelle knew better. Takoda, the Apache warrior who had haunted the edges of the town's nightmares for years, whose presence alone commanded respect and fear. His long black hair fell over his shoulders like a dark curtain, catching the flicker of oil lamps and glinting turquoise jewelry with each subtle movement. His muscular frame was partially illuminated by the warm glow, the kind of presence that made the saloon seem smaller, tighter. The air itself taut with expectation. Maribel's chest rose and fell with measured rhythm, hard hammering beneath her leather coat. Her hand hovered over the grip of her Colt, the cold steel of familiar comfort. "I will marry you on the spot if you force this girl to regret and take my revenge," she declared, her voice slicing through the tension like a whip. The words were sharp, intentional, each syllable dripping with promise and threat. The room seemed to exhale collectively. Takoda's dark eyes, piercing and unreadable, fixed on her. There was no amusement there, no shock, only acknowledgement. He studied her for a long, drawn-out moment, the kind of gaze that could strip a person bare, see every scar, every hidden thought. And Maribelle did not flinch. She could not. She had rehearsed this for years, counting the days, nursing the rage and grief that had formed like hardened steel inside her heart. Maribelle was 30, but the fire in her eyes made her appear ageless, fierce, and untouchable. Her auburn hair whipped around her face, tangled by the desert wind that had followed her inside, the heavy scent of sage and sunburn still clinging to her coat. She had come to Red Hollow for one reason, to confront the past, to make those who had stolen innocence and happiness from Lillie, the girl who had vanished without a trace 5 years ago, pay in full dot at the corner table. A pale face peeked from behind a mug of coffee. Lillie, the girl who had grown into a young woman hardened by fear and secrets, whose life had been stolen and rewritten by lies. Her wide eyes locked on Maribel's, a mixture of fear, recognition, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Lillie's hands trembled slightly, gripping the mug like a lifeline, as if seeing Maribelle here, in this chaotic, smoky den of sin, was both terrifying and inevitable. Takoda shifted, the subtle clink of his tribal jewelry sounding like soft drums in the tense silence. He did not move closer, did not speak, he simply watched. A mountain of strength and control, the kind of presence that made the room itself pause. Every other patron was frozen, unsure whether to intervene or retreat, aware that stepping between Maribelle and Takoda or between Maribelle and Lillie would be folly. Maribel's hand brushed the edge of her coat pocket, where she carried letters, photographs, and evidence she had collected for months. Proof of betrayal, of conspiracy, of the town's darkest secrets, all ready to be laid bare on the saloon's scarred wooden bar. Tonight, the music, the laughter, the clink of glasses would be replaced by truth. Tonight, justice would not be polite. Her voice softened slightly, but there was no gentleness in it. "Lillie, look at what they took from you. Look at what they made you endure." Her eyes flicked to Takoda, who nodded imperceptibly. Silent agreement. The Apache warrior, feared by all, was not here to stop her, not here to interfere. He was here as witness, as protector, as the reckoning's unmovable force. The piano player faltered, hitting a sour note as if sensing the storm about to erupt. Chairs scraped the floor. A glass rattled nervously on a table. And in that pregnant silence, Maribelle felt the first spark of liberation and rage collide inside her, igniting a fire that would consume lies, betrayal, and years of stolen innocence. Red Hollow Saloon would never be the same again. The saloon's air was heavy with smoke and tension, the scent of whiskey and cigar smoke mixing with the faint metallic tang of anticipation. Maribelle Storm remained by the swinging doors for a heartbeat longer, letting her gaze sweep the room, memorizing every expression, every subtle twitch of fear or curiosity. Lillie, pale and trembling at the corner table, had yet to speak, her fingers clutching the coffee mug as if it could anchor her to the present, protect her from the storm that had just walked in. Maribelle stepped closer, each bootstep echoing in the hushed room. "Lillie," she said, her voice low but cutting through the thick haze. "You need to see this." She laid a stack of yellowed letters, photographs, and documents across a table nearest to the bar, the papers trembling slightly under her fingers. Each page was a thread of truth, a glimpse of the years of manipulation, betrayal, and fear that had shaped Lillie's stolen life. Lillie's eyes flicked nervously toward Takoda. He had not moved from the shadows behind the bar, his muscular, shirtless frame still and imposing, long black hair cascading over his shoulders. Tribal jewelry clinked softly as he shifted his stance, his dark eyes sweeping the room like a hawk. Patrons stole glances, whispering under their breath, careful not to meet the warrior's gaze. There was no mistaking the power radiating from him, the aura of someone who could bend the room to his will without lifting a hand. Maribelle's heart quickened not with fear, but with the certainty that Takoda's presence meant she could finally act. "This is what they wanted to hide from you," Maribelle said, gesturing to the papers. "Every lie, every rumor, every person who pretended you never existed." Lillie's hand shook as she reached for a photograph, a faded image of herself. Barely a teenager, standing at the edge of the desert with a smile stolen by fear. Tears pricked her eyes and she swallowed hard, trying to keep them from falling. Lillie's voice cracked. "They said I was dead." Her words were almost a whisper, fragile but loaded with years of pain. Maribelle knelt slightly, placing a steadying hand over Lillie's. "You were never dead. You were trapped in their lies, but you're alive now. And tonight, they'll all answer for it." Her eyes flicked to Takoda. He stepped forward, the leather of his belt and the faint glint of turquoise and silver jewelry catching the lamplight. His presence was a shield and a weapon all at once. The warrior's gaze rested on the bar, scanning every patron with silent precision, ensuring no one dared interrupt or flee. Maribelle's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every breath in the smoky air, every flicker of candlelight, every subtle movement of shadow across the walls reminded her of what was at stake. Lillie's stolen years, her lost innocence, and the town's long-forgotten sins would be exposed here, in the very place where lies had been nurtured and secrets buried. For a moment, the piano player's hesitant notes broke the tension, each key sounding fragile and out of place in the charged atmosphere. Maribelle turned to Lillie, her expression softening just slightly. "I know it's terrifying. I know it hurts. But you're stronger than they ever believed. And you're not alone. Takoda is here. I'm here. And together, we'll see this through." Lillie's fingers tightened around the photograph, her knuckles white. She met Maribelle's eyes and nodded, the first spark of determination flickering in her gaze. Years of fear, of silence, could not erase her courage entirely. And tonight, with Maribelle and Takoda by her side, she would confront the truth. A low murmur began to ripple through the saloon as curious patrons edged closer. Sensing the tension, Maribelle's voice cut through again, sharper this time. "This town owes you answers. and we're about to make sure it pays attention. Takoda's dark eyes flicked to her, then back to the room, unspoken agreement passing between them. He was ready. She was ready. And Lillie, trembling but alive, was ready to reclaim the life that had been stolen. The room seemed to lean in, as if even the wooden beams and the cracked floorboards were waiting for what would come next. Tonight, the Red Hollow Saloon would no longer be just a place of smoke, whiskey, and idle gossip. It would become the stage for a reckoning that no one present would ever forget. And in the shadows, the Apache warrior waited, every muscle coiled like a spring, every glance vigilant, ready to act the moment the storm broke. The piano player's hesitant notes faltered, trembling under the weight of the saloon's tension. Patrons shifted nervously, sensing that the air had become electric, charged with an invisible storm. Maribelle Storm straightened, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face, and let her eyes sweep the room. Lillie's pale, trembling hands clutched the coffee mug like a lifeline, but her gaze, flickering with a mixture of fear and curiosity, never left Maribelle. Across the bar, Takoda, the Apache warrior, had moved slightly, his shirtless torso gleaming under the flickering oil lamps. Muscles flexed with subtle tension, every inch of him coiled like a predator waiting for the first movement of prey. The turquoise and silver of his tribal jewelry caught the light, clinking softly with each shift, an audible heartbeat that resonated through the smoky saloon. His dark eyes swept over every patron, assessing, judging, and silently warning anyone foolish enough to interfere that this confrontation was not theirs to interrupt. Maribelle stepped closer to Lillie, spreading out the letters and photographs she had brought. "You need to see this," she said softly, though the words carried steel beneath the gentleness. "Every lie they told you, every secret they kept, every person who pretended you never existed. You deserve to see the truth with your own eyes." Lillie swallowed, her throat tight. They said I was dead," she whispered, voice trembling, almost lost amid the creaking floorboards and soft hum of whispered speculation from the other patrons. Her eyes darted nervously toward Takoda, who nodded imperceptibly, the slightest tilt of his head a silent signal. She was protected. Maribel's hand brushed lightly across Lillie's. "You were never dead. They wanted you gone, hidden, forgotten, but you're alive. And tonight, they're going to answer for what they took from you." She paused, letting her gaze flicker to Takoda, who was no longer merely observing. One hand rested on the edge of the bar, fingers brushing the hilt of a knife at his belt, his posture coiled and ready. There was an unspoken agreement between them. The reckoning would begin tonight, and no one could stop it. The saloon felt smaller now, walls closing in with anticipation. Maribel's mind raced. Every man who had wronged Lillie, every gambler who had whispered lies, every corrupt lawman who had turned a blind eye, every townsperson complicit in her disappearance was somewhere in this room. She could feel them. They hadn't expected her to return, and they certainly hadn't expected Takoda to be by her side. She leaned over the table, voice low, compelling. "Lillie, this is your chance. You've been silent too long. They've counted on that. But tonight, that silence ends." The girl's trembling hands hovered over the photographs again, finally finding courage in the unflinching gaze of her friend. Takoda moved, stepping from behind the bar with the quiet grace of a predator. The sound of his boots against the wooden floorboards made some patrons flinch instinctively. He stopped beside Maribelle and Lillie, his eyes scanning the room, muscles tense under the dim lamplight. No one dared meet his gaze, and the air thickened with fear. Maribelle met his eyes briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She would confront the town's secrets, and he would ensure that no harm came to them while doing it. Takoda's presence was more than protection, it was a statement. A declaration that the wrongs done to Lillie would not be tolerated, that anyone attempting to stand in their way would face consequences swift and uncompromising. A man at a poker table shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Takoda and then at Maribelle. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. Maribel's lips curved into a small, confident smile. She didn't need to raise her voice. The room already understood. The storm had arrived, and the first drops of reckoning had begun to fall. Maribel's pulse raced, but her hands were steady. She turned back to Lillie, whose eyes now burned with tentative resolve. "We move carefully," Maribelle whispered. "But we move. Tonight, nothing stays hidden. Everyone who ever tried to erase you will see the consequences." The Apache warrior's dark eyes glimmered with silent understanding, muscles coiled like a bowstring ready to snap. The saloon, once a place of laughter, poker games, and cheap whiskey, had transformed into a stage of judgment. And in the center of it all, Maribelle Storm, Lillie, and Takoda, the unstoppable trio, were ready to face the town, the past, and the truth. No matter the cost. The piano's final hesitant note hung in the air. Then silence. And in that silence, everyone knew. The reckoning had begun. The Red Hollow Saloon had never felt smaller. The smoke hung heavy, curling around the low-ceiling beams like restless spirits, and the warm glow of oil lamps painted long shadows across the cracked wooden floorboards. Maribelle Storm leaned over the bar, letters and photographs spread like a battlefield before her. Each image a piece of a stolen life. Lillie sat across from her, fingers trembling as she touched the fragile papers. Her eyes, wide and haunted, darted nervously from the documents to the imposing figure standing behind Maribelle. Takoda, the Apache warrior, stood shirtless, muscles taut beneath his sun-kissed skin, long black hair flowing over his shoulders, turquoise and silver jewelry clinking softly with each subtle movement. His dark eyes scanned the saloon, unwavering and vigilant. Patrons had begun to whisper, some moving to the back of the room, while others froze, mesmerized by the intensity radiating from the trio. Maribel's voice cut through the tension like a whip. "Look at this, Lillie. Look at what they stole from you. Every lie, every rumor, every person who pretended you never existed." She gestured at a faded photograph of a young Lillie standing alone at the edge of the desert, smiling despite the terror in her eyes. "They wanted to erase you. They thought you were weak, silent, gone, but you're here. And tonight, you take back what's yours." Lillie's breath caught. I don't know if I can face it all," she whispered, voice trembling. "All those years?" "You can," Maribelle said firmly, gripping her friend's hand. "Because you're not alone. Not anymore." Her gaze flicked to Takoda, who shifted slightly, the soft metallic chime of his jewelry echoing in the tense air. Every man in the saloon could feel it, the weight of the warrior's presence, coiled strength ready to unleash at a moment's notice. Suddenly, a few townsmen at a poker table muttered under their breath, glancing nervously at Takoda. One man smirked, trying to mask his fear. "Seems like we got ourselves a little drama tonight," he said, his tone forced casual. Takoda's eyes narrowed, dark and unyielding. Every muscle in his chest and arms tensed, the turquoise bracelets glinting ominously. Patrons instinctively stepped back, chairs scraping against the floor. He didn't move toward the man, didn't raise a hand, but the sheer intensity radiating from him was enough to silence the entire saloon. Maribelle ignored the murmurs, focusing entirely on Lillie. "You need to read this," she said, sliding a letter toward her. Lillie's hand shook as she unfolded it. The words inside were cruelly honest, details of the conspiracies, the betrayal by trusted figures in Red Hollow, and the years of deceit that had stolen her freedom. Tears welled in her eyes as she read. They lied to everyone. They hid me, she whispered, her voice breaking. "They wanted me to vanish." "They did," Maribelle agreed. "But no longer. Tonight, the truth comes out. Everyone in this saloon, every person who turned a blind eye, they will face it." Her voice gained strength, echoing through the room. Leaving no doubt that the reckoning had begun, Takoda shifted again, taking a position closer to Maribelle and Lillie, muscles rippling under his bare chest. The soft jingle of his necklaces and bracelets punctuated the silence like a heartbeat. Every eye in the room was drawn to him, some in awe, others in fear. The Apache warrior was more than protection. He was a warning, a force that no one dared test. The piano player faltered again, a wrong note shattering the fragile calm. Chairs scraped as patrons edged away, the air thick with suspense and anticipation. Maribelle leaned closer to Lillie. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Lily's fingers clenched the letters, a spark of courage igniting in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. I'm ready." Maribelle smiled, a hint of relief flickering across her features. "Good, because the moment we've waited for is here. And Takoda." Her eyes met the warrior's. "We'll need your strength. No one leaves this room without seeing the truth." The Apache warrior's dark eyes glimmered. A subtle nod, and he relaxed slightly, though every muscle remained taut, ready. The saloon had transformed from a place of idle gossip and casual gambling into a stage for confrontation, justice, and revelation. Tonight, the past would collide with the present, and in that charged, smoky air, every patron knew it. Red Hollow Saloon would never be the same again. The creak of the saloon doors drew every eye. A gust of wind carried dust and the faint tang of the desert outside, but it was the men entering who brought the real storm. They were the ones who had wronged Lillie, the men who had hidden her, betrayed her, and allowed the lies to fester for years. Smirks crossed their faces, arrogant confidence in every step, as if this smoky, crowded room could contain their past deeds. Maribelle Storm's hand hovered over her Colt, the cold steel pressing reassuringly against her palm. Her amber eyes burned with intensity as she met their gaze, voice steady and commanding. "You've been hiding behind lies for too long. Tonight, you answer for them." A ripple of unease passed through the newcomers. They had expected silence, submission, but not this. Not Maribelle. Not the pale girl who trembled yet glimmered with the first spark of courage. And certainly not the Apache warrior looming behind her. Takoda shifted slightly, muscles coiling, the turquoise and silver jewelry around his wrists and neck clinking softly with menace. His long black hair fell in waves over his broad shoulders, catching the flicker of oil lamps. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every step he took, every subtle movement, radiated danger and precision. The room itself seemed to shrink around him. One of the men sneered. "And who's this? Some desert savage playing hero?" Takoda's eyes darkened. In a fluid motion, his hand rested on the hilt of a knife at his belt. A low, menacing growl rumbled from his chest. The smirk froze on the man's face. Even the bravest patrons stepped back, sensing that the slightest misstep would trigger violence unlike anything they had ever seen. Maribelle didn't flinch. "He's more than that," she said, voice like steel. "He's here to make sure justice is done. And tonight, it will be." The first man lunged, trying to reach Maribelle, but Takoda moved faster than the eye could follow. He grabbed the man's arm with a vice-like grip, muscles flexing under bronzed skin, and slammed him against the bar. The metallic jingle of his jewelry punctuated the movement, and the impact echoed through the saloon. Chairs toppled, mugs shattered, and a few patrons stumbled backward, eyes wide in awe and terror. Maribelle drew her Colt with a smooth, practiced motion. The room held its breath. Every movement she made was precise, a deadly dance of calculated courage. "Back off," she warned, pointing the gun directly at the others. Her voice carried the weight of years of planning, pain, and determination. Lillie, initially frozen, found her voice and her courage. She stood beside Maribelle, clutching a chair like a shield, her eyes scanning the room for the remaining threats. "Leave her alone," she said, voice firmer than she felt, her trembling hands gripping the chair tightly. The spark of defiance in her eyes ignited something in the room. Whispers turned into silence. The intruders hesitated, realizing the fight they had walked into was unlike any they had faced before. Takoda's imposing figure, every muscle taut, every movement precise, radiated a threat they couldn't ignore. Maribelle's Colt gleamed under the lamplight, unwavering in her hands. And Lillie, trembling but standing, finally held her ground. A chair clattered to the floor. A glass shattered against the wall. The piano player froze mid-note. The saloon, once a place of idle gossip, poker games, and whiskey, had transformed into a battlefield of justice. One man, the leader, drew his gun. But before he could aim, Takoda was upon him, faster than thought, disarming him with a combination of strength and precision. The weapon clattered across the floor. Maribelle didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, Colt steady, and leveled it at another who had tried to attack Lillie. The room held its breath. "Enough," she said, voice firm and commanding. "Tonight, no one leaves without facing what they've done. Understand?" The leader swallowed hard, eyes wide, realizing the gravity of the situation. Takoda's dark gaze pinned him to the floor, muscles rippling, as though he could crush anyone who dared resist. Silence fell, broken only by the soft clinking of Takoda's tribal jewelry. Maribelle's chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Lillie's hands had stopped shaking, her shoulders straightened, and a faint, victorious glow had returned to her eyes. The first wave of reckoning had begun, and the saloon would never forget it. Outside, the wind swept through the town. Inside, Red Hollow Saloon had become a stage for justice, and at its center stood Maribelle, Lillie, and Takoda, the unstoppable trio. And they were only getting started. The saloon was eerily quiet after the storm. Dust hung in the air, mingling with smoke, and sunlight filtering through the high windows painted jagged lines across the floorboards. Broken chairs lay scattered, shards of mugs glimmered like shattered glass, and the faint scent of spilled whiskey lingered, acrid and sharp. Red Hollow Saloon had survived countless brawls, but none like this, none that carried the weight of justice and revenge. Maribelle Storm stood near the bar, Colt still in hand, eyes scanning the room. Lillie sat on a toppled chair, hands shaking slightly but gripping the letters and photographs like talismans. Her pale face was streaked with tears, her amber hair tangled from nervous fingers. But her eyes glimmered with a mixture of relief and newfound courage. Takoda, the Apache warrior, remained alert behind them, shirtless, muscles taut and gleaming in the muted light, long black hair falling over his shoulders. His turquoise and silver jewelry caught the sunbeams, reflecting flashes of color across the dusty floor. Though the fight had ended, his posture remained one of readiness, every muscle coiled as if anticipating another threat. Patrons who had survived the chaos gave the trio wary glances, silently acknowledging the authority and power they now commanded. Maribelle lowered her Colt slowly, exhaling. "It's done for now," she said, voice firm but carrying relief. "They've had their warning. They know we won't be silenced." Lillie nodded, still trembling, but this time from exhilaration rather than fear. She held the letters close. I never thought I'd see this day," she whispered, voice soft but resolute. "To know the truth. To face them." Takoda stepped closer to Maribelle and Lillie, scanning the saloon one last time. His dark eyes softened just slightly as they met Maribel's. No words were needed, his presence alone reassured them. The warrior had been their shield, their silent guardian in the storm, and he would remain vigilant until every threat had been addressed. Maribelle moved to collect the scattered papers, carefully stacking them on the bar. Each photograph, each letter, was a thread connecting the town's darkest secrets, proof of lies that had spanned years. She looked down at Lillie. "These will protect you," she said. "They'll remind the world of what they did. And they'll make sure no one dares repeat it." Lillie's hands rested lightly on the stack. I don't feel as small anymore," she admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Like I can live." A faint smile curved her lips, fragile but genuine. Maribelle returned it, a warmth piercing the tension that had dominated the last hour's dot from across the room. A nervous patron cleared his throat, drawing their attention. What happens now?" he asked cautiously. His voice trembled with uncertainty, a mix of awe and fear. Maribel's gaze swept over the room, sharp and unwavering. "Now," she said. "Now we make sure the truth spreads. They can't hide anymore. They can't pretend Lillie doesn't exist. And they will never forget Red Hollow Saloon tonight." Takoda shifted slightly, his gaze still sweeping the saloon, muscles taut even in stillness. The metallic clink of his jewelry punctuated the heavy silence. He exuded a sense of quiet control, a promise that while the battle had ended, vigilance would remain. The warrior's presence reminded everyone that the line between chaos and order was fragile, and that justice had just arrived. Maribelle turned back to Lillie. "We've won the first round," she said, her voice softening, yet still firm. "But there are more secrets out there, more lies, and more people who will try to hide the truth. Are you ready to face that with me?" Lillie's grip tightened on the letters. Her eyes met Maribel's, filled with determination that had been absent for far too long. "I am," she whispered. "With you, and with him," she added, nodding toward Takoda, whose dark gaze met hers briefly, acknowledging the trust and bond forming between them. Outside, the wind swept through the streets of Red Hollow. Inside, the saloon remained a place of history, now marked by the day courage, vengeance, and truth had collided. Maribelle, Lillie, and Takoda stood together amidst the wreckage, a trio forged in fire and justice. They had faced the storm, and though more challenges awaited, they were ready. United, unbroken, unstoppable dot, and as the first quiet moments of relief settled over them, each knew the battle for truth and vengeance was far from over. But for now, they had claimed their victory, and Red Hollow Saloon would forever remember the day its shadows met the light. The Red Hollow Saloon had never felt heavier with silence. Dust hung in the air, sunlight streaming through the cracked windows, painting long, jagged lines across the floorboards. Broken chairs, shattered mugs, and scattered papers told the tale of the night's storm. But now, amidst the wreckage, a quiet tension lingered, awaiting a promise, a threat yet unresolved. Maribelle Storm's amber eyes swept the room, sharp and commanding, every nerve alert. Lillie sat upright on a toppled chair, clutching the letters and photographs like shields, the pale fear in her eyes replaced by a hard-earned determination. Takoda, the Apache warrior, stood shirtless behind them, long black hair cascading over his broad shoulders, turquoise and silver tribal jewelry glinting in the sunlight. His muscles, taut and coiled like springs, radiated vigilance, warning anyone who dared challenge them that justice had arrived and would not be denied. The doors of the saloon creaked once, twice. A hush fell over the remaining patrons. The men who had orchestrated Lillie's suffering, the ones who had tried to erase her existence, stood frozen in the doorway. Their arrogance had dissolved into terror. They had seen the storm, and now they faced its aftermath. Maribelle stepped forward, Colt lowered but ready, voice unwavering. "You thought you could hide from your crimes," she said, her gaze piercing. "You thought Lillie's voice could be silenced forever. But tonight, the truth has found you, and there's nowhere left to run." Lillie rose beside her, letters clutched tightly. "All the years you tried to erase me. It's over," she said, her voice steadier than she believed possible. "You've taken enough. Now it's your turn to face the consequences." Takoda moved silently behind them, every step purposeful. His presence was more than protection, it was an unspoken promise of retribution. The warrior's dark eyes met the leader's for a heartbeat, muscles flexing. A shadow of warning that made the man's confident stance falter. The leader tried to speak, stammering a weak excuse, but Maribelle cut him off. "Save it. Your lies won't matter anymore. The people here, the town itself, it will see the truth and you'll answer for every deception." Takoda stepped closer, shoulders broad and imposing, the sunlight glinting off his tribal jewelry with each subtle movement. He didn't raise a hand, didn't speak, but the threat was palpable. The men in the doorway shifted nervously, realizing that this was not just a confrontation. It was the end of their control, the collapse of the carefully constructed world they had, built on fear and deceit. Maribelle gestured toward the photographs and letters. "These are your deeds," she said. "Every lie, every betrayal, every attempt to silence an innocent life. And tonight, justice will be seen by all." She turned to Lillie, voice softening, yet still firm. "You've been brave, stronger than anyone ever gave you credit for. This moment belongs to you." Lillie's hands tightened around the documents, a spark of courage igniting in her eyes. I'm done hiding. I'm done fearing," she whispered, her voice firm. "And if it takes every eye in this saloon knowing the truth, then so be it." The patrons, silent until now, began murmuring, leaning forward as realization dawned. Whispers of astonishment, fear, and respect swept through the room. Red Hollow Saloon had become more than a building. It was now a stage for reckoning, for truth, for redemption. Takoda finally relaxed slightly, though his presence remained commanding. His dark eyes swept the room, ensuring no one dared interfere, every muscle still ready for action. The Apache warrior's silent vigilance gave both women the courage to stand tall, to face the past and the people who had tried to steal their lives. Maribelle nodded to Lillie. "This is the end of their power," she said, "and the beginning of yours." Lillie smiled faintly, a mixture of relief, pride, and something entirely new: freedom. Outside, the wind swept through Red Hollow, carrying the faint sound of distant desert sands and the promise of change. Inside, the saloon, scarred but standing, bore witness to a night of courage, vengeance, and justice. Maribelle, Lillie, and Takoda, an unstoppable trio, stood together amid the wreckage. United in strength and purpose, the leader of the men sank to his knees, pale and trembling, finally understanding that the tide had turned. The rest lowered their heads, defeated. Red Hollow Saloon would never forget the night truth overcame fear, and a stolen life reclaimed its power. And as the sunlight shifted through the dusty windows, glinting on Takoda's tribal jewelry and illuminating the faces of the two women, one thing was certain: the storm had passed, but its lessons, its courage, and its justice would endure. The Apache warrior, the fierce Western woman, and the once helpless girl now standing tall together had reshaped their fate. Red Hollow would never be the same again.